Hi, this is Eli Ocheltree of the SnoKing Beekeepers Association. This is our third Wednesday monthly meeting, and we'll record the first hour, hour and a half, even though we often stay to talk bees beyond that. I'm going to start out with some kind of announcements and sort of public service announcements and club announcements, and I promise we'll get to the topic of Varroa as much how-to as I can help people with, and as much why you do what you do as I can. If you understand the concepts, quite often you can correct for whatever incomplete information you get from someone, and you can make it work. So something came up just recently. Somebody was showing me this picture, and there's like 10 attendant bees jammed in each queen cage. And I guess you don't have to worry about the attendance. I looked this up on honeybeesweet.com. There it is. I put quickly. If you look there, Honeybee Sweet, spelled that way, the way it is in that address, Suite. Rusty Burley was somebody that I've really trusted. She has a great website. She's always on my list of references and recommendations. You go to her search, you type something in like, okay, attendance queen cage, and she'll tell you, well, yeah, it's not a problem to have them in there. You don't have to release them before you put the queen in. It's okay if they're there, but I don't understand why 10. I've never ever heard of 10 until today. Or maybe this was yesterday, someone told me. If you're going to have that many worker bees in a queen cage, I put this picture with the candy plug up because if you're going to have that many worker bees in there, if the person who put the attendant bees for the queen, and the idea is that they're going to take care of the queen, and I can think of no reason, somebody said it's up to 10 in there. I can think of no reason except if you were shipping these through the U.S. Postal Service, maybe regular mail, I don't think you have to pay for express. The postal people would prefer that you pay for express shipment and get those bees out of their mail trucks. But if it were to go regular mail, it could take days to get there, and maybe that many bees would help make sure that she didn't get chilled. They couldn't do much about cooling her, really. So I don't know why that many attendants would be in there. So I asked the person who told me about it to, hey, if you find out, let me know. I'll put it on the Facebook page. But the candy end up, we almost always show you when we show you an installation. If you go look at your beginner, your apprentice, your journeyman's manual, you're going to look at it and it's going to have the candy down. Well, if these workers are older and they die of old age in the cage, if the opening was down and the dead bees were on top of it, the workers would have to not only remove the candy plug, but they'd have to start pulling out the dead bees. I could see that as being a problem, and I remember reading someplace that it could happen with 2 or 3 attendants. Why you would put 10 in there, I have no idea, but I looked at this and said, if you buy a queen this way, please ignore what I said about the candy end down, put the candy end up. Some people, I think, do it sideways. You still need to make sure that the screen is completely exposed to the rest of the colony. It said something about candy end up and cork end down. Some of these have 2 ends, and you have to check. There's 2 holes sometimes, and there's a cork at one end and a candy at the other end. The other thing is, since these look so weird, make sure that the candy is accessible to the outside bees, because sometimes there's a little piece of tape on there. So just make sure if you pick one of these up, you've never, like me, you've never seen it before, make sure you understand how the queen is going to be let out. And if anybody knows why there's 10 attendants, you are welcome to interrupt me and tell me right now, because I just think this is the most clueless thing I've ever seen. Queens are shipped overnight in individual queen cages. I could see why they'd have a couple of attendants with them. But when they're shipped in boxes. If you go look it up online, actually, Manlaker Dayton if you want to know how they're shipped, you look up shipping boxes for queen cages, and you'll see that the attendants wander around outside of the cages, and there's a little bit of sugar syrup, maybe some pollen sub in there, and they feed the queens through the screen if they do get stuck in transit, because it could happen. Shouldn't with express shipping, but it could. Okay, I just put that up because I don't want anyone to lose their $50, $60 queen because they didn't know. Okay, oh, I hear, oh, that's okay. Queen introduction. This is the time of the year people start saying, I don't have a queen, I don't have a queen. Okay, first thing is, you have to know you have a queen. I've known people to buy 3 queens in a row because they didn't stop, think, talk to people, relax a little. Sometimes you go into the hive, you panic, and you have to just shut it back up, go back out and think. Call somebody. Did you take the picture that you need to send to somebody? Well, when a queen introduction fails, the number one reason is the bees already have a queen, and especially beginner beekeepers jump to the conclusion that there wasn't a queen there because they didn't see eggs, they didn't see young larvae, and they're really panicked. They're really worried. Maybe the worker bees have completely backfilled the brood nest, especially right now with nectar. And later in the summer, sometimes they'll fill it with pollen. And that happens. And if you are not, it happens there that the queen is trying to find a place to lay. And an expert beekeeper, okay, second or third year, knows that a queen who wants to lay will start going up into the honey supers, and she'll lay around the edges of the honey frames. She'll lay anywhere she can. You will find eggs in the darndest places. If she's a good queen, she's not gonna stop on her 1,000+ eggs a day just because the nest was backfilled with nectar at this time of the year. Okay, that's the first reason why you can't find the queen and you don't see where the eggs are, is because the eggs aren't where you thought they would be. And the workers are taking them out and putting in nectar. They've gone nectar crazy. The next reason is a little bit later this month, we might go into a bit of dearth. In when the nectar flow it comes down, not the pollen flow, but when the nectar flow comes down, sometimes the bees go, well, we don't really want to raise out a lot of brood, and the flow is stopped, and we can ramp down on the population. They will actually follow behind the queen, remove the eggs, and if you come in after a week, you're not going to see eggs. You're not going to see very young larvae, and you're going to go, where is my queen? Well, the solution to that one is put some feed in. Can be really pretty light syrup. You don't want to do 1-to-1. I bet you could even do weaker than that. You put it in the hive, feed them, come back and check in a few days. Give them, say, 4 days. And they are probably going to be leaving some of her eggs if there's any space in that brood nest. If you are introducing a queen and you're sure the queen is missing and you put the cage in, sometimes people think they can just stick the cage anywhere in the hive. When the hive is very small, actually that's not a big problem. As long as the queen doesn't get chilled, some people just put it in really quickly in the top box. But really, if you want to be sure, you paid for that queen. You don't want to wait for a long time for her to emerge. You want to make sure she gets accepted fast. You put the cage in the brood nest. You make sure that screen side is accessible to the workers and that they can get to the candy plug. It doesn't have some dumb little piece of tape over it that you didn't know about. So, basic recommendation is whenever you're putting a queen in a cage, put it in the center of the brood nest, and if there's no brood, still put it where the bees would expect to have brood, and the young nurse bees would be most likely to be coming back, the youngest bees in the hive. If you have open brood, great, not yet capped. But if all you have is capped, still put her there. Her pheromones mixed with brood pheromones is going to tell the hive that everything is right And if you have absolutely no comb at all, because you're putting a package or a swarm and you have no drawn comb at all, just make sure that she's in the center. The cage, her cage is centered in the hive, hanging down, well suspended, so that the bees can cluster around her. And always feed. With full tummies, bees relax, they're less stressed, and queens get accepted. And then always come back and check for release. That's usually when people find the funny little piece of tape or something that they didn't know was there. So don't wait too long. I mean, a week is tops, but about 4 days, they should be able to get through that candy plug. There was one more thing I wanted to say on queens. Oh, here. I constantly preach the ultimate queen test. You go into your hive and you see a list of things. The eggs and the larvae are missing. Maybe there's some cat brood there. You see queen cells. Maybe they are emerged with the flap hanging. Maybe they look kind of funny. They don't look like really healthy ones. Maybe you've come in and there's been a drop in population. And maybe half your hive swarmed off with your good queen, your well-mated queen that maybe you paid for or really had your hopes for that she would last the whole season. And it could be dearth, as I mentioned. If you're seeing something really weird, like the drone cells cappings are like scattered all over brood frames, in the center of the frame, not just around the edges. Something sounds funny. The bees sound funny. They're acting either more jittery or more just like listless. Okay, you have to take the ultimate queen test. And this is why you need 2 hives, because if one doesn't have any eggs or larvae in it, you need another one to take the eggs or just hatched larvae from. You put that frame into the one you think has no queen, and you let the bees tell you. If you give them worker brood eggs that are just hatching into larvae, you come back in 4 days, so mark the top of the frame because it makes your life a lot easier to come back 4 days later. Look to see if they're making queen cells or if they're raising out that worker brood as if it's ordinary worker brood. If they're raising it out, they are telling you that they have a queen. If they are making queen cells, they do not have a queen. If they cannibalized all the worker eggs and larvae that you put in there, we're in dearth, feed us. Okay, and then feed for several days, then repeat the test. And dearth, sometimes people who haven't learned the lingo yet say, what's dearth? It just means very little nectar. It could be pollen, but in Western Washington, I can't think of a time we don't have pollen sources out there. I can't think of one. The only time the bees can't get pollen 12 months of the year is when it's raining. Something is producing pollen any time of the year. So anytime you're running into trouble, or friends running into trouble, you're discussing it online, please remember the ultimate queen test. Don't spend the money. Don't panic. Start right away. And you can start it right away as long as you have a frame of brood that you could spare from another hive. Why not go ahead and do it and have an answer in 4 days? You might figure it out in 1 day, but if you've already started the test, you know you're going to get an answer. So I preach this all the time. Now I'm going to jump from queen cages and queen introduction problems, because those always come up at this time of year. I'm going to jump into the Evergreen State Fair. And we have sign-up links for our club. And if you're not in the club, I'm sorry, but check out your fair, because don't miss the chance to meet the other beekeepers in your area. If it's the Stanwood Fair or over in the Jefferson County side or Pierce County does the Puyallup Fair, which is like 3 weeks worth of days. They're closed 1 or 2 days of the week. That's incredible. If you're a Pierce County beekeeper, that sounds like a great chance to go to the Puyallup Fair. And we have our club booth, and I have the sign up. It's in the newsletter. I put it on Facebook. I'd be happy to send it to you. There's also another booth, the honey booth, that's indoors. sit down out of the sun, shaded, and you are there where the honey has been judged and put on display. Tim Eadie's in charge of that. That's his sign-up genius. Either way, you get credits for helping for actually the volunteer raffle, which I didn't even think to mention. We'll be raffling off another donated single deep hive setup, lids and bottom board, same as last year. And then there'll be a couple of other books and I think some baseball caps and some things like that that will be the runner-up prizes. But the grand prize will be, again, a hive setup. But you qualify one chance per shift at either booth because Tim needs his help too. And then we can use up to 3 people at a time easily at our booth because it's kind of big and popular. If you want to enter your honey and your wax, 2 meetings ago, we did this. So you can go to that monthly meeting, and he did it at just about the beginning of the June meeting. No, or was it May? This is July. I think it was May. Okay, his picture shows, when you go to the monthly playlist, that his picture shows white beard, blue shirt. That's Tim. Fair entries. So if you want to get your wax, your honey, your informational poster or whatever in, there's the deadline for that for bee keeping products is Saturday, August 17th, 5 p.m. That's called open class. It's really fun to do. And if you want to do anything, you would like to demonstrate the waggle dance, which I think everybody should want to demonstrate the waggle dance. I'll get up and do it with you. You could do mini presentations under the tent that's really close to our booth. I'll help you out. I'm uninhibited at this point. At this point in my life, I have made a fool of myself in front of so many crowds and so many people. I have no problem. If you want backup, I'll be your backup. But just lighting a smoker is something that people need to see, and they enjoy just having it explained. Just saying there are parts of the hive. Bees live in a house. If they're really little kids that are sitting down watching me, then and they like having a ceiling and a floor and walls. That's what we have in our houses, and bees need them too. Okay, you can put this on any level you want. If you want to get up there and talk research papers like Duncan is always trying to do, you can do that too. I'll try to get somebody to sit and listen to you. I will. Admission tickets. You get free admission tickets, and we will figure out how to get it for your family. And you get 1 admission ticket and 1 parking pass per shift you work automatically. And we usually have a few extras. We'll work something out. The rates seem to go up every year. I think the parking is a killer, especially on the weekends. $15. Okay. And then paying per person, it can be $100 to get your family in the door. And you haven't even started on all that yummy, bad for you fair food. Okay. And this is part of, for many people, their journeyman service to finish their certification for journeyman. If you are taking or have finished apprentice, keep that in mind. And I can send this. This is a double-sided log sheet I like to send to people so they can kind of keep track. WASBA rules are on the left, and then kind of a sign-up sheet on the flip side of the paper. Let's see. Am I actually ready to talk about Varroa? I'm thinking there's another topic here, but I can't see it right now. Let's see. Okay, we're going to talk Varroa, and then I'll remember whatever. Oh, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. Where are my pollen? We've got to talk about pollen. Okay, hang on. Somehow I lost the pollen slides. They are here because there's a chance to help out with a pollen study that Edmonds, here it is. Somehow I bounced ahead. There, Edmonds Community College. The chemistry department wants to analyze pollen. And the Edmonds College Bee Club, of which we have members who are also members here in this club, Hannah Woods, Jameson, Herman, if you meet a Richie, he is, and Gabriel, and a bunch of people are also taking beginner and classes through us while also being a member of their on the college campus bee club with apiary. Well, anyway, the chemistry department at Edmonds Community College and the Bee Club are collaborating, and there's a full description in the Facebook discussion group. But if you can't get to that, I thought I'd quickly put in here that it's a chance to participate. You would start by emailing your location in Western Washington to Hannah Woods, email at the bottom, to see if a sample is still needed from your area. They're going to look at geographical areas and request a kit if you're selected to contribute. And when you do it, you just collect pollen pellets over 1 to 2 days between July 18th and July 25th using a hive pollen collector. That's the only way you could keep them clean. And I'll show you a couple that I've got. And I've got some pictures. And if you've ever been interested in doing this, and I actually have the pollen collectors because I've always been interested in doing this, a great time of the year is just about this time of the year, because the bees finish going nectar crazy, and you'll see the percentage of foragers who are returning. You'll see that suddenly there's more pollen baskets after it kind of dropped off during the height of the blackberry flow. At least it does in my hives. Bees go nectar crazy, and then as the nectar backs off, they go back to bringing in pollen. Okay, they don't need very much. They'll send you the kit. It'll have the little container that you're going to mail it back in, the form you fill out, and it's just a tiny sample. I was asking Hannah, 2 to 5 grams. Can I say that's kind of like a heaping teaspoon is the absolute maximum? And they don't even need that much. I'm basing that on way back many years ago. Somebody said, if you can't visualize a gram, stop and think about a little packet of artificial sweetener. That what's in there is about a gram. So that's not very much at all. You will have to mail very promptly to avoid mold, and you've got to make sure the college gets it by July 30th. So if you think you're ready to do this, at least email Hannah, and I think they would love to get a large area. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they could use a sample from the San Juan Islands and from Jefferson County and maybe up in the foothills of the Cascades. This could be fun. They don't need a lot of them. So don't be insulted if you email and they say, we already have 4 people from downtown Seattle. Sorry. But you never know. If you've never trapped pollen, a lot of people want it so that they can get the pollen pellets, dry them out, smash them up, and mix them with their pollen sub patties, especially if you're making your own. And if you need a recipe, Cayman Reynolds has a good recipe that stays soft longer in the hives if you're making your own. And you mix some of the pollen in, and the bees do like it better. They prefer real pollen. To trap that, you have to knock it off the bees when they're going in and out of the hive. Okay, to do that, you put these little devices over the entrance, and you only let them use that entrance. And when people do this, especially like at the time of the year, I was saying when we go into dearth, it's actually nectar dearth, and the bees will start suddenly bringing in so much pollen. And they did it last October, even into November. There was no nectar to collect, and the bees were just bringing in so much pollen and stuffing it into their stores, more than they can ever use. They're going to throw it out in the spring. So taking some of that, you should not feel guilty about. So here's one. This one on the left is one you just sit it on the front of the hive, and they can only go in, I guess, up here. And this drawer is pushed in, and then when you're collecting, you pull it out. This one, the drawer is right here. This one I actually own. So if I can stop the share for a minute, I can show you this one and how it opens and closes. And that's the tray that fits underneath. And I can show you this one. Now, the ones that just fit on the front of the hive are a lot easier to get on and off. These ones that are full size tend to go near the bottom, or sometimes you can put them in the middle or on top. So you have to stack and unstack. So if you're thinking of ever buying one because you'd like pollen, for yourself as a food supplement, for your bees as a food supplement for them, or for some other reason. You might think about whether you want one of the ones you have to stack and unstack. Apiary, which I am not that familiar with, apparently the tray slides out the back, and if I understand it, you close off this front opening by doing these sliders. You open the back, and the poor bees have to go in the back. After I finish the presentation, you can ask Tony, because Tony's nodding his head. I can see him nodding his head. He may have to explain that, but it's all very clean plastic. Okay, let me see if I think I need to stop the share here to show you. This is a diagram of the one that sits on the front. And the bees are only allowed to go in this new entrance. You block all other entrances. Here's the old entrance blocked. And they have to go in. So I'd probably, if I was doing something like this, changing something for the bees so as not to confuse them and not to increase drift, I would do it very early in the morning or late at night. And that makes it, and you don't want to be unstacking your hives in the middle of the night. So these front hang ones, I think, make a lot more sense to me. But if you're going to collect a lot of pollen, you might want to use the other ones to get, if you think that you're going to be doing it all season long. Let me stop this for a second and then I will. Okay, then maybe I think I can make myself big, can I? Let me see, how do I do that? Presenter view or something. Speaker view? No, I did it wrong. I don't know. Okay, I'm just going to have to do it. I don't know how to do that. Sorry, not that technical, but I did want to show you. Okay. Let me see. This one, this was one of the ones that it showed. And okay, this way, I think. I think it's this way. And the bees go in and they can only go in certain holes. The holes are actually cones. I don't know if you can see that these are cones. And they come through, so they can only go one way in. Then this one is an entire, you have to put it in the hive stack. And there's a side drawer that comes completely out, which is a screen, has a screen. The screen is good because it keeps the pollen from getting wet and lumpy. Okay, so that one you'd have to stack and unstack or put at the top. You might be able to, if your bees will accept it, and if you don't give them a choice, they're going to have to accept it. Then the other one that is easier, it is all easy wash plastic, is this one. There we go. Okay. This one, that one I'm sure you have to block so that you can't collect every day. You don't want to with your bees to collect every day. This one, I understand how it works. There's a door here, and you just make sure there's a little way you slide this sideways and you get the door to stay up. Okay. Bees don't have to fight their way through. So whatever day that the bees are just going through, they don't get their pollen baskets knocked off. If you let that down, okay, now they have to struggle to get through and they have to drop their pollen, and their pollen drops into this bin down below. This bin, which I guess is not exactly identical to the one I showed you. It's all plastic. It's all easily washable. It'll be easy to keep clean. You want your pollen clean. And this is the one I have the most hopes for. I've always been going to do this. Okay, this project is going to get me to do it. So starting Saturday, if you come out to the apiary, we are going to install this. And these tabs here, there's a tab. I think that just goes right into the front of the hive, and this sits jutting out. Okay, it'll be an experiment. We'll put the other one on too, but I'm not so sure they're going to be crazy about that big thing. And there are other designs. So let me get back to showing you some of the other designs again. Okay. Hopefully we're back to the hive stack. You are screen sharing. Okay, I think so. So that's the wood one that sits on the front. It's an interesting idea. And there is a lot, even if you don't want pollen yourself, some people want to buy it. So to trap the pollen, you allow only entry through the trap entry. Close everything else off. You're going to have to pick whether you're going to put it down here. I guess some can go there. But apparently it's usually done between two hive boxes by fixing it in. You can put it, I think you can even put it all the way at the top. I think people do that. You might collect every third day if they're raising brood. I don't know. Sometimes in dearth periods, they seem to be bringing in so much pollen. I think you could collect every other day. Especially, I said on these notes, watch for the high pollen foraging in July and August. Really. And then last fall, I kept looking at it. And if I hadn't been so busy smashing yellow jackets, I would have probably gotten my pollen traps on. But I was spending all my time smashing and pinching yellow jackets. I was getting really good at it barehanded. Oh, and when you collect, you should collect daily. And if the weather gets rainy, it's going to be really hard to not get moldy. So especially if it starts getting overcast or cool while you're doing this, collect daily, freeze right away, or dry and then freeze. Now I think we can get to Varroa. Ready for Varroa? Varroa is like this bad word. You just get so tired of it. After a while, you just say it's the V word. I don't want to hear about Varroa, but we have to talk about it. We assume that all hives have Varroa. Just because you don't see that pesky little single flea on your cats or dogs, it's just waiting for you to take your eyes off it, and then it's going to lay hundreds of eggs. Okay, think of Varroa the same way. Pesky little parasite. The Varroa problem is not going away, and it doesn't make sense right away. I can spend an hour or two explaining why it isn't like any ordinary parasite problem. It's a very well adapted parasite. It's doing great. The honeybees aren't enjoying the situation as much, but it's a very efficient parasite. The non-chemical methods, I can go through them quickly, but they're just not efficient enough. Some of them could work if you were diligent, you did every possible non-chemical method there was, but the average beginner is not going to be able to do it. If you want to do it as an advanced technique, I'd be happy to talk about it. But realistically, overwhelmingly, for the overwhelming majority of hobbyist, small scale, and especially the commercial beekeepers, you just aren't going to get treatment free. You're going to have to go to the chemical treatment choices. So the goal of tonight's talk is really to try to find two methods that are inside your comfort zone. And when I say comfort zone, there are reasons why you just flat don't want that in your hive. I've got 3. I just don't want them in my hive. I have a degree in biochemistry and microbiology, and I do not care for the 3 large molecule synthetic ones that are bad for the environment, bad for everything, and bad for everybody. That's my thing. I'm not comfortable with that. So let's find your comfort zone, which can be a completely different basis, like how you administer the treatments. But before we even do that, we really need to talk about monitoring Varroa levels. We know they're there, but how many? At what point do you treat? And you aren't going to get really good, clear answers. You ask me a question, I'll give you the best answer I can. The books are always telling you to do the alcohol washes or some other liquid, ether or Dawn detergent and water, just a little bit, or a little bit of granulated automatic dishwasher detergent in water. And some people say that's better because it doesn't sud so much. Some people do the sugar roll. They're telling us that those are the best. But honestly and truthfully, once you start doing OAV, oxalic acid vaporization, I honestly find that that's the better method is I clean my slide out board off, slide it in, zap once with a dose of oxalic acid, come back 3 to 5, not more than 5 days later, and zap again and look at the drop on the board. For some reason, the first dose that you give, mites will sometimes not fall, and then they fall the second time. And if they do, then you can continue doing doses the same way, but just continue doing dosages until you see the mite level come down to your best guess as to what's healthy. A mite count that just happens to be falling on the sticky board just in the natural course of the hive, if it's more than a few, even per week in the spring, that makes me really nervous. Whereas some lot more later in the year doesn't. Seasonality gets really important when you're monitoring. Some people say, well, I'm only going to do one, like I'm only going to do oxalic acid. And if you are in a large number of people who are sick of hearing about oxalic acid is the answer to every problem with Varroa, you have my sympathy. It is, as I call it, the golden child of the Varroa treatments. And I can explain why. But even if you really think that that's your one method, that's all you need, you can do that any time of the year, in any weather. Okay, and you're convinced that's it for you. I'll tell you that if you pick a single method like that, something will go wrong. Life happens. There'll be the vacation or trip. You're going to be gone for a couple of weeks, or you end up injured or something for a couple of weeks, and you can't get out to the hives and do it. You could get out there once quickly and put some other treatment in, but you can't get out and do, for example, OAV every 3 to 5 days. You can't do it. And dragging a battery around or whatever, you cannot do it. It snows at your out apiary or even just your backyard and you can't get there. And maybe it melts enough you could get out there once. Is there something else you could do instead of that single method you thought would always work? Whether you have one really, you love this method, but if it gets too hot or too cold, you can't do it. You need another one. And sometimes you've delayed treatment, things are getting in the way of life. I know life keeps happening. Why we can't just do our beekeeping and everybody else leaves us alone and doesn't have any expectations of what we should be doing on Saturdays and Sundays. I mean, do people really have to get married on the best beekeeping days of the year? I mean, come on, you guys. Couldn't you postpone your wedding so that I can get into my bees? Okay, I don't think you're going to get any sympathy from your family. They're not going to miss their graduation or whatever, or the family reunion. Okay. So you need something that you're going to be able to do on a different schedule or that will treat for longer. You may also find that from one year to another, you change your beekeeping style. You want to go in for fewer times into your hive. You are starting to have health issues. Anything that requires picking up, stacking, and unstacking boxes so that you can put a treatment right down in the brood nest. You're going, wait, I can't do that anymore. This is not fun. And beekeeping is supposed to be fun. Maybe you change your hive style. You go from the stacking to the long. Well, yeah, you don't have the heavy lifting, but an incredible number of Varroa treatments are supposed to sit on the brood frames, and in a top bar or a Langstroth long, you don't have space above the brood frames. You put an acid there, well, the top bar doesn't leave you any space. The wedges fit together. A Langstroth long, maybe whatever you're doing to cover the gaps in your frames, which I don't totally understand how most people do it. I actually did not put pictures in, but I just lay actually inner covers in a row, like 3 of them on my Langstroth long to cover the 30-some frames, tops of the brood frames. And if I do that, I could get some treatments in there on top of the brood frames. I could get a little bit of space. It's how I get my pollen subpatties in too. maybe you've changed the size of your hive and now the proportions don't work because everything was sized for 10 frame deep and you're now in 8 frame Western. Even 8 frame deep, or you're overwintering in nukes and you need another option. So don't limit yourself to just one option and think it's all you're going to need. It will not be available when you go to buy it. If you, like me, were totally ready, okay, I was totally going to do oxalic acid with a gun. The gun stopped working at the peak of the Varroa population. And for some reason a number of reasons, some of which we understand, we need to start our treatments early. So this is already, hopefully you've already been thinking and you've already been kind of monitoring. And like me, you've done the double zap with the OAV or an alcohol wash. You've been checking your slide out boards, which only tell you really if there's something terrible happening. You've been decapping your drone brood that's in between the hive bodies. You know that drone brood that's always there anyway? You might as well spike it with that decapping pork and pull out those drones. I mean, hey, the drones, right? They can be sacrificed. And you pull them out and you look at them and see if they've got any mites on them early in the season. Shouldn't be any, usually aren't early in the season, but we're getting later in the season. You might start seeing it. So keep doing that. But we know that even when we're watching, and even when we're sure that everything was still okay in mid-July, something happens at the end of July or in August, and the Varroa spike in population, way high. And some of it could be we thought our Varroa treatments were working, like Apivar. It's failing on a hive-by-hive basis. It's unpredictable. It might depend partly on where you got your bees from. I mean, it's failed in large scale, like hundreds of hives in one person's commercial apiary. Somebody else will say, well, one hive is fine and the other one isn't. I gave them both Apivar. I'll show you Apivar quickly later on. And it's just strip you hang down. And it's a long release, month and a half or more. It's just supposed to do a gentle, long, steady release. But for some reason, well, we know that it's failing because it is a synthetic molecule, and those are the ones that the Varroa develops the resistance to the most easily. The fancier the plumbing, the easier it is to stop up the works. And when the plumbing is a biochemical metabolism pathway, yeah, it's easier to stop it up when it's some little fancy thing in there. In the pathways, the biochemical molecule to molecule transitions that happen in your body. One thing that is suspected too that happens in late July, August, as we approach dearth and as the mating season is somewhat over, bees don't necessarily stop all at once. Our sponge, our drone sponge disappears. And when I say that, Varroa prefers drone brood. And it prefers drone adults, which is what Zach Lammis was doing research on. I don't have the name of the paper. I don't know if he'd actually formally published yet, but he was looking at it, and even drone adults are preferred. Well, when the bees kick the drones out, when they go into dearth, they say, hey, we ain't feeding the loafers, the guys that just sit around and think all they're going to do is go out up there in the sky and mate with the queen. Huh. You guys are not helping out, you're just eating. And so they kick them out. But when the drone is struggling and getting kicked out of the hive, I have seen how fast Varroa can move. And what Zach Lammis thinks is happening is that the Varroa aren't leaving the hive with the drone. Overall, they're getting onto the worker bees. And so you get this move, this transition over. And we can get our treatments, if we're doing them well, we can get them at the right times of the year. I don't know, the slide may be a little out of order, but oxalic acid, if you're tired of hearing about it and you're not interested in doing it, this is why everybody talks about it. It is the golden child. There was this movie about the golden child. Who is the guy, the funny guy that does that? Really funny guy. anyway, who did the Golden Child. It's kind of a Jackie Chan type movie.
Eddie
Comedy.
Murphy.
What?
Eddie Murphy.
Okay, Eddie Murphy. I knew it was one of those. Okay, yeah, he does it. Okay, but this is gonna solve everything. Oxalic acid. Well, it's affordable. You can do it during any season or temperature. It could actually be raining on you if you don't think you're going to get electrocuted. And with the guns, I guess you wouldn't get electrocuted. Western Washington is perfect for us. It's a soft chemical. And if you've never thought about chemicals being more dangerous or less dangerous, I'll show you soft chemicals, a diagram of it later. And there's several methods of administering it. You don't have to do vaporization. You can mix it up with sugar syrup or with just glycerin and dribble it on the bees. You can start it with just the wand, and the respirator costs you some money, especially I think costs and everything have gone up. So yes, you might have to invest $100 or more. The wands have come down in price. I think they're like 30, 40, but the respirators, that could be 60, 70. The bleach, the wood bleach, which is what OAB is, costs you practically nothing. But if you're going to have very many hives, or you're going to keep bees for more than a couple of years, a lot of people look at it because it is cheap, affordable, any time of the year, any season. So but that's not for everyone. And I don't want people delaying fall Varroa treatment too long. And this is the weird part. And Dawn Beck did a great talk at the WASBA conference last October. And I talked to her just within the last week. And she said she expects to give that talk again because not very many people got to listen to it and it wasn't well recorded. And she explains about what a fat winter bee is, why they're so important, and why we need to make sure that our winter bees are fat and that they are going to make it through the winter to get us well into the spring, especially with our long, not particularly harsh, but long winters. And she was reasoning, I can't remember if this is hers or mine. If she was reasoning backwards or if I came up with these dates, they're probably hers. She was saying, if you want the winter bees that could live for months, say 4 or 5, if we have really bad winter, who knows, maybe some of them 6 months to live through our winter and raise out the first spring brood, they have to be under control in July because you want healthy overwintered bees. They have to be raised by healthy nurse bees. If you want those winter bees to emerge, say September 15th, maybe if you're lucky, you can get them to emerge later than that. The last 2 falls have been really sunny. And that could be a big advantage if your bees are still raising brood in October, which I think they were easily last year. But let's take September 15th. Then the queen would have to lay those eggs about August 25th. Okay, that's pretty far away, right? No, you want the nurse bees that are going to feed those eggs to emerge about August 18th from eggs laid by the queen July 28th. Oh my goodness, it's already July 17th. You need to be thinking now about having healthy winter bees should winter come early. So the summary of that is you need healthy summer brood in late July, August to have healthy winter bee brood in September, to have those healthy fat bees maintaining the hive and raising the healthy spring brood. This kind of timeline is mind-boggling. So if it's too much, just do it because we experienced beekeepers say, do it. Do it because SnoKing says so. Worry about treating now. I think earlier this year, I published, I think in one of the newsletters, all of these links. I'd be happy to send them. I always talk about Varroa and winterization kind of go together, although I know it's hard to think about winterization right now, but you are thinking about winter by the time you're in your second or third year of beekeeping. You start understanding that you never get to forget about winter. You think about it all year around. It's like an obsession. Beekeepers have been accused of that. Okay, why is Varroa so important? It really helps if you just come out and say the word parasite, sucking the insides out of our bees and our brood and our adult bees. Okay, that helps. If you just call it a parasite, call it what it is. A very happy parasite, very successful. It came to the United States about 1986, 87. People vary a little on the date. It jumped a species. It wasn't always in Apis mellifera. It was over in Apis cerana, the eastern honeybee, which had worked out a system of living with the Varroa, but Apis mellifera had not worked out a system. And so really what Apis cerana did was work out kind of a tolerance situation. Okay, Varroa can reproduce in the drone brood, but it's got to stay out of the worker brood. And they worked it out. But in Apis mellifera, they haven't had enough time to do that. There are no Varroa-proof bee stocks. I don't care what you're told. Honest, if there were, I'd be the first person buying them. Who wants to do all this chemical treatments? There is no once-a-year dose solution. If you happen to be super isolated or something, it's possible that you're going to have less reinfestation. But I don't know of anybody who's near any other person with hives. And that's within, say, 3 miles or more. We all are within 3 miles of other beehives. Even if you don't believe it, you are. You would have to live maybe out in the middle of eastern Washington, where it's really dry, maybe possible there. But western Washington, I think you'd have to be up in the tops of the Olympics or the Cascades for that to be true. The non-chemical methods are really very limited. Drone trapping, for example, is seasonal. I'll show a picture of that later, just in case anybody doesn't know how to spare the drone larvae, pull them out and look to see if you've got Varroa in there, or pick up the whole frame of drone capped brood and take it out with all the mites that are under the cappings in the drone brood. There are some very drastic methods that are used by non-treatment people. For example, they will even do lopsided splits, put all of the brood in one part of the split of the hive, put the queen, I think, in the other one with no brood, and they will destroy all the capped worker brood to make sure they got rid of all the worker, all the Varroa that they possibly could. That is sort of inducing an unnatural brood breaks, but there's some other advanced methods. And at the Trophallaxis meeting, and I noticed that Colleen was signing on. She can explain it better if you want to go into the advanced methods of how you would do brood breaks and force a decrease in the population of Varroa, but maybe a decrease in the population of your bees too. If there's anyone that doesn't know, Varroa feeds on both the brood and the adults. I think this top photograph here by Zachary Wong is actually a little bit posed. I don't think there's not usually that many Varroa. More than one Varroa female mite can go in and lay eggs and raise young in one brood cell, but I think that was a posed shot there. I don't think that many came out of one brood cell. But they do feed on the larvae under the cappings when the brood is capped. On the adults, they have to hook themselves in, and this is a picture. Samuel Ramsey, if you can possibly watch videos by him, I ask everybody in my classes to watch the one where he presents. I think it's the Beekeepers of Northern Ireland, Northern Beekeeping, something like that. And he has a really good explanation, shows the pictures that I'm showing. Here's the picture of where the Varroa mite inserts its mouth here. That's the mouth wound, and then inserts its first appendages. legs, I guess you'd call them. And then you can kind of see the outline of the legs. And here it is. This is actually the mite here, which has managed to push its way between two abdominal plates. Your bees have plates on their backs, their back of their abdomens, and the underside of their abdomens. Tergites on the back, sternites on the underneath. And the mites especially like to go underneath and kind of along the edges and get themselves wedged under. Fascinating video, he explains. One thing about Varroa that people don't understand is that Varroa spends very little of its life on an adult bee out in the open where all your chemical methods will get to it. It spends most of its life underneath. Here's a Varroa mite, female Varroa mite, jumping off a worker bee, dropping. I don't know, they move pretty fast. I could believe they could jump. And then dropping into the brood that's about to be capped, 5th instar larva. And here it is, it's going to be capped over. She hides down there. You only ever see females outside of the brood cells. The males, after they mate inside under the cappings, they die. Okay, so you've got this female. She's already mated. She's already armed and dangerous. She starts feeding. After so many hours, she lays her first egg, and then so many hours, she lays another egg, another egg, another egg. First egg she lays is male, and it matures first and mates with the females as they are laid, and they go through the stages to I guess adulthood, through their nymph stages. Now, not all of those will survive. The male will die inside, and 1 or 2 females will come out, and they could stay on the worker bee that emerges, or drone if it's a drone. Now, this is a worker bee here at day 21. 1 more might be able to mature of the offspring of that original female foundress mite and might be able to come out on a drone, because that 3 days there gives them a little longer to mature. But the most important thing about this diagram, I put an arrow here. That foundress mite that came out, she gets to go directly back in to another larva that's about to be capped and start over again. Her daughters are the ones that have to spend a few days riding around on an adult bee, feeding on it. That is part of how the Varroa escape us no matter what we throw at them, because they're hidden with the brood, and anything that kills them is probably going to kill some brood too. This is the simplistic graph that shows you, and it shows an important concept. The blue line is your bee population. January through December, you're trying to get your bees to peak up there at June for the blackberry flow is just ideal. If you can get the maple flow here in April, pretty good. If you get some knotweed over here in August, early September, good. But you really are going for that peak at the middle in June. This year, we've been going halfway into July. I have seen times when it comes in May too. I've seen the month of May be the big blackberry season. But that's what your hope is. And that's fine. And the Varroa are increasing too. That's why they're not as big a problem with your hive until your hive population starts falling, but the Varroa population has been growing and doesn't stop growing. And it peaks. And it peaks at about that. Do you remember I said that if you want your September 15th fat winter bees to be nursed by healthy nurse bees, you're talking about going back to like July 28th when the nurse bees were being raised as larvae and becoming the healthy nurse bees that are going to raise super healthy winter bees to get you through the winter. Okay, and this is from Honeybee Healthy. Okay, now the problem is this is very simplistic. It's nice. But actually, it's crazier than that inside the hive. And the brood, when the brood drops and the number of total bees in the hive is dropping too, but the Varroa population has risen to a maximum, each one of those bees that you were hoping would either feed your winter bee or be your winter bee are suddenly exposed to a lot more Varroa if you don't do something to flatten this curve, which phrase we have all learned. We want to flatten this one right here, the Varroa curve. To do that, we've got to get started. Okay, duplicate slide. There we go. We've got to, first of all, be sure how many there are. Did we knock them down enough that we can wait a little while for another treatment? None of the chemicals are going to be good. Oxalic acid, as far as I can find, is the safest, gentlest, most reliable, least likely to ever create resistance, right? Overall, it is the golden child of Varroa treatments. To detect, I mentioned the drone trapping. I do have a picture coming up of the decapping. If you haven't seen that, with the decapping fork, checking the drone brood. The counts, and here's a plastic Varroa Easy Check counter. And then Randy Oliver shows you how to make Varroa counters. If you'd like to do a version of this, it's much cheaper. He had to do it because he was doing a very large Varroa study at one time. Then the slide out boards. It looks shiny there, but I think that's supposed to be white, the white slide out board. You can count on there. And the double dose of oxalic acid works well. That's the one I really prefer out of all of them. Although you shouldn't rely even on one, you should go ahead and do more. It is just plain difficult to see Varroa. People say, I don't see it. No, of course you don't see it because it's mostly on the underside of the adults, wedged in between those plates. And when it's not on an adult, it's spending most of its life in the capped brood underneath the capping. So yeah, you don't see it. And the symptoms of Varroa infestation are just, they're sick. I mean, if you had a parasite sucking your insides out, you just get sick with everything. On this alcohol wash, sugar roll, mite count board, drone decapping, drone brood decapping, they all, except for the mite count board, and except for the oxalic acid zapping, they require opening the hive, which is why, but the mite count board is not much help unless you're combining it with something like OAV and you are zapping, fumigating with the oxalic acid, and then you are counting the drop. Okay, then that's helpful. And you don't have to go into the hive. You can do that any time of the year. But the board count alone is not very accurate. And if you do get a count, you have to interpret it. And you're using your best guess based on what you saw the year before and what other people are saying they accept as their threshold at which they decide to treat. The Varroa symptoms, it hides because all of this list, I've got a long list here, could be due to anything else, any number of other reasons, including the viruses, SEMA, could be bacterial, it could be pesticide. I mean, actually, sublethal amounts of pesticide could give you these symptoms. Shorter lifespan, reduced learning ability. For example, how to get out and forage, and how to get back to the hive with the load that's been collected. Reduced overwintering. That's not a single trait. That is a number of things that have happened to the hive, resulted in overwintering successfully or not. How much honey is produced? There's a lot of factors in that each year, and some of them change each year. Varroa also just plain introduces the viruses into the bodies of the bees. At least 18 is the last I heard. Actually heard written down, or actually read it. You may find pupae being thrown out and discarded at the entrance. You might see bees crawling around looking sickly. The deformed wings. It's not the only thing, the only indication of a virus, but it is a strong one. Your hive may just look sick. And here we are, pictures of what's called parasitic mite syndrome. The bees are giving up. They're going listless. They can't even get the dead brood taken out. It's not really any particular disease. It's just they can't keep up with the basic housework. They're all too sick. The nurse bees, the foragers, everybody's too sick to do their job. Here's some more pictures. This is from Ramesh Sagili at Oregon State University. It's just, there's bees, but they can't do everything. And occasionally you'll see the deformed wing on one of them. But sometimes it's just, they're just too sick and listless to do the jobs. If you actually do see these red mites on the backs, it's too late. By the time people spot those on the backs of their bees, that's a severely infested hive. You need to act before that. If all your bees take off, they stopped raising out brood, I guess they dieted the queen and they took off with her. Everybody's gone. That is true absconding. And if you find a mess of mites on the bottom board, that can be why. And it can happen at any time of year, but this time of the year, because the mite populations have zoomed, it's really likely. If you need to go through how to do an alcohol wash, I recommend you go to scientificbeekeeping.com. It's a good method. I don't actually use this method. It's good in a couple of ways. When you shake off brood frames, which is what Randy Oliver is demonstrating, into a white Rubbermaid container, two things happen. The older bees fly off, and the younger ones that you're interested in actually drawing the sample from, it's supposed to give you the best, most reliable mite count. I'm not totally sure of that, but that is the thought behind it. And when you're dumping all the bees out like that, you can spread them in a single line. You can make sure you don't have the queen. If you're not confident about spotting a queen, she should be obvious when you have a flat number of bees, single depth on a white surface. And then you put the bees, a half cup of bees out into alcohol or some other liquid that's deadly, or powdered sugar, swirl, 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 and let the mites fall through the mesh at the bottom. It's easier, I think, just to buy the orange and clear and white Varroa Easy Check. For me, it's easier. But it is possible to make your own. And he shows how on scientificbeekeeping.com. Here, I promised a picture of the decapping of drone brood. You just spike through the tops of the caps of the drone brood and pull them out and look to see if you have your mites right here. And that tells you they're starting to pick up. The population is starting to pick up when you can see it that quickly. I don't like the dumping the bees out, shaking all the frames. Instead, I take a frame, a brood frame. Imagine this is a brood frame and it's totally full of bees, and you check both sides and you make sure the queen's not on there. And then I like to take a flat-sided container and just drag it down lightly on, just raking it lightly over the backs of the bees. They tumble down into the flat-sided container. I dump roughly a half cup here into the Easy Check, and I continue from there. I just don't like bees flying all over in the air, but you have to be sure that you can spot the queen. You don't want to put your queen through the alcohol wash. Okay, you're pretty sure you've got enough bees that it's measurable at the end of your alcohol wash, or you did the double dose with the oxalic acid vaporization, and you're sure that you've got a drop it's noticeable. Earlier in the year, almost any drop is too much. This time of the year, you start seeing it, and you know it's time to start treating. But you're going to have to decide, and you have to find something that fits you. Something, as I say, inside your comfort zone. I like soft molecules. They're small molecules or they're biotanical. There's something that's found biosimilar. It's similar to something found in nature. I don't like the large molecules of synthetic organic molecules. You have to make sure you understand how many treatments or doses are involved. If you just start and you don't carry through, you can't in your head get the idea that you did the treatment because you didn't finish it. And some of these you are supposed to rinse, lather, repeat. I mean, it's like treat, rinse, retreat. Treat, monitor, treat. We need a phrase for that. Some of them aren't meant to be done at certain times of the year, largely based on the high or low daily temperatures. Some aren't supposed to be done during the flow. And some of them, you worry about development of resistance, but that's really in large apiaries. Within your own hive, you select a little. But if you are doing the treatments the way you're supposed to, that's usually only a factor if your mites were already resistant. For example, with apivar, which showed really bad resistance in the last couple of years. I do want everyone to know that I have looked and looked, and so far, there isn't anything non-chemical that's going to be easy, or even several things that together will replace chemicals. People were hoping that natural size cells and foundationless frames would help. The brood breaks, it takes an expert to really do what the literature is talking about when it talks about brood breaks helping cut down Varroa populations. That's actually much more complicated. And as I was saying, Colleen's in here and she could start talking to you because she gave a talk at a couple of months ago at the Trophallaxis meeting, the meeting for people who have taken academic journeyman and up. It's a very good group. If you qualify, please come. It's most interesting discussions. So that's difficult. That one's just too difficult for most people. Resistant stock. We can get a little bit of resistance, a little bit of tolerance. Tolerance and resistance are not the same thing, incidentally, because it may not mean that you don't have the viruses coming in just because they can survive a certain number of Varroa there. If you can isolate your bees, like the man who is north of the Arctic Circle, Etienne Tardif up there, north of 60beekeeping.com, if you can get that kind of isolation, you're not going to have to treat after you get the Varroa knocked down at the beginning. Heating elements inside the hive have failed, except for the people who are trying to sell them. Controlled climate facilities. Okay, we can't afford warehousing our bees, but they actually have found that that does drop Varroa, partly because they tend to increase the CO2 levels in there. And they're controlling the brood. They're keeping things low enough that the temperature low enough that brood is controlled, and there's not as much for the Varroa to reproduce in. Jennifer Hahn was working on a fungus that would be lethal to Varroa mites, and you could put it in the hives, and it would actually infect the Varroa mites and not the honeybees. That's been coming and coming. I don't know how many years it'll be before that becomes available. And of course, the real solution is breeding resistant bees. So far, looking at all these non-chemical, they're worth trying to get a mite-resistant queen, depending on how much you pay. Screen bottom boards help a tiny bit, but nobody's exactly sure why. That fungus in the hive, eventually, we hope that'll come. The brood breaks, as I said, is extremely complicated. If you try to do the uneven split and then maybe even cull the capped worker brood that still has mites in it, it's an advanced beekeeping technique. And Colleen talked a lot about this. I think it was the May meeting. Or was it the April meeting? Okay. No, May. Should have been the May meeting. And so this is an interesting topic. We could talk about it. I think it's beyond the scope of most of the people here. I don't think most of the people here are that interested in this. So we are left with 9 options that we can actually buy and get in the United States, and most of them are here. We have Formic Pro, Mite Away Quick Strips. Both of those are formic acid. Hop Guard is a beta salt sort of organic acid. You probably wouldn't even really realize it's an acid looking at it, but technically it is. Organic acids are actually very weak acids compared to nitric or sulfuric or any of those other ones you've heard about. they're actually, until you really concentrate them, they are very weak. Oxalic acid in the commercial pesticide application form is apibioxal, legal for commercial pesticide applicators to be using. The essential oils, Apivar, oh, not Apivar, Apilife comes in this kind of wafer, and also essential oils, Apiguard comes in a gel tray. This is the one that's been failing, these white plastic strips. So if you pick up a nuke, or would be in a package, you'd be in a nuke, and you see these hanging in there, and someone says, I treated for mites, and you look at those, this has a high failure rate right now. People have actually said that they saw that was what they've been treated with. So you sort of have three types: organic acids, essential oils, and the bigger synthetic molecules. Whatever you've heard about mushrooms, so far it's a feed additive. There is one that's supposed to help boost the immune system, but it isn't directly anti-Varroa. It's somewhat antiviral. It boosts the immune system. So some people are trying that, a tincture that's sold by Fungus Perfecti, Paul Stamets, and WSU has been doing some research with it too. Okay, acids. Are you okay with acids? This is where we start talking comfort zone. Are you okay with acids? Some people say no, but then they meet HopGuard and they say, oh, I can handle the acid. Of course, I will warn you that this brown strip that's hanging over is the slimiest, yuckiest stuff you'll ever have to deal with. Most people do HopGuard once and say never again, but it is very organic. These are all accepted in on organic managed farms. You can't say you have organic honey, but you can say that you have organically managed apiaries using products like this. Essential oils, again, that would be acceptable. I think that should be acceptable under every organic certification, but check, could be wrong. These are mostly reliant on thymol. This one, I think Apilife bar, it's little wafers that you place on top of the brood frames. And the gel tray, again, goes on top of the brood frames. Remember I mentioned there's kind of a problem when you're dealing with Langstroth longs. You have to find something you can use where you're going to have a way of hanging it instead of putting things on top of the brood frames. You can't do that in the top bar at all. A Langstroth long, you might be able to do it by using something like this emery shim, which is actually, for the depth of this tray, which is close to 1/2 inch, you often have to use a little shim like this. A man named Emery designed it, IMRIE, and it's sometimes sold as a honey shim to provide an extra little knot. That notch there in it provides a little extra entrance for honey foragers not to have to crawl through the entire brood nest. If you place that notch up by the honey supers, they can go directly in. But in addition to the thymol on both of these, the one on the left with the wafers has, I think, a little camphor, menthol, and eucalyptol oils. Some of those are either thought or proven to help with tracheal mites. Maybe with nosema too, although I think formic acid is the one that they're thinking helps more with nosema. These are the three large molecules that are generally used and available for sale in the United States. Both of these two, Checkmite and Apistan, lost their effectiveness on mites. The mites developed resistance really fast. Apivar held out for quite a while, and it was working, and now it is failing. So this one, if you're going to do this, monitor afterwards as well as before to make sure that it had an effect. And one of the problems with that is it traditionally has been used at cool times of the year when you can't go into the hive and do an alcohol wash. You could do the double dose OAV if you have the wand. If you were to combine it with that, that would be your backup in case this failed. And you could see whether or not it failed. I talk soft and hard. To me, it's a big difference whether I'm dealing with a little molecule. Here's formic acid. Here's oxalic acid. Then I start getting into these really weird benzene ring type molecules, and they're starting to get, they don't degrade into anything I know. If something like formic acid degrades into water, carbon dioxide, some other small molecule, okay, I understand that. Nature understands that. Nature is not prepared for these others. Amatraz, I believe, is apivar, and fluvalinate, I always get confused. I think that's coumaphos, but it could be the apistem. I think it's coumaphos. But this one, for example, fluvalinate, has different stereoisomers, so nature would have to handle each one of these molecular configurations because it's a mix of those. It's not any one of them, it's a mix, and nature has to figure out how to deal with that. And I sure would rather, if I'm throwing something on the compost pile, and actually formic, after your pads are spent, you're allowed to take the plastic off and throw the rest of the pad on your compost pile because formic acid is so found in nature. And naturally in honey too. That's why you can use it with the Superzon. In the volatiles, in the acids, and even in the essential oils, if it's volatile and you can smell it, it's probably not good for you. And you should be wearing some kind of respirator. I use halves a lot, but you've got to be careful to rinse your skin that's exposed. Full face would be better with disposable cartridges that are rated for organic vapor and acid gas. And they do come in sizes. People use these a lot in auto body work, painting and such, spray painting, chemicals like that. So sometimes you can find them in supply places like that. I know Amazon sells them. I've been talking about these 9 different methods and showed you pictures of almost all of them. I guess I showed you at least a picture of, Vapistan and Checkmate. The red line here is where you go, where it divides the organic above from the not accepted as organic management below. I made up this chart, and it's more detailed than the Honeybee Healthy chart, but the Honeybee Healthy chart might be easier to read. Something will have a name, like Max, Mighty Way Quick Strips. That doesn't tell you that it's the active ingredient is formic acid. So I made these columns going across. Are these approved organics? Yes. Are they, what's the application method? Is it a solution, a vaporizing spraying? Do you break the tablet? Is it a fill, a gel in a tray? Is it a pad on top of the brood frames? What are you comfortable with? And this is something that everybody needs to find what they're comfortable with. It starts here. You may have to expand what you're comfortable with. Maybe you thought you'd never use an acid, but you're finding out that, you need something that's better than Hop Guard, which is, like I said, the sloppiest, messiest stuff you'll ever deal with. So going across the temperatures at which you can use them, and that can vary from year to year. So read the instructions really carefully. If you are not given the instructions when you buy miticides, request them, come to me, Google on the internet. And when you Google on the internet, you may have to put, like, Hop Guard has 1, 2, 3. You may need to put the Roman numeral afterwards, the 3. Mighty Way Quick Strips, I'm sure, has more than one formulation. Same for Formic Pro. And sometimes stores are still selling the older version. It hasn't actually expired yet, but it's an older version, and it takes a slightly different temperature. I especially notice it at temperature and treatment duration, spacing the doses. If there's an option for doing it at half the dose, for example, Formic Pro and Mighty Way Quick Strips, the Formics. Formic is known for being really hard on bees, killing brood, killing workers, and often causing a queen to supersede or go missing. Especially if it's not done correctly, at the correct temperature, with the correct amount or lack of ventilation, and it's the first 3 or 4 days after you apply it that it really makes a difference if the temperature not go above. But it's also important that the temperature not go below a certain amount, because it won't circulate properly in the hive. In something that's very volatile, the bees jump into action. They don't want it in that hive. The Apiguard gel, they don't want that gel in their hive. So in the case of something volatile, they'll all start ventilating the hive and moving it around. And that is good because it moves that vapor around to the entire, everything gets treated. A lot more of the bees get treated that way. If it's a gel, it needs to get tracked all over, a contact viticide. So this is a really good way to go through it. If you need to walk through it, if you try reading through this and you can't get through, talk to me. I'll help you the best I can. Occasionally, there's an additional target of one of these miticides. People actually found that the bees were overall healthier when they started using some of these chemical miticides because they target things like the tracheal mite. One targets chick mite plus targets the small hive beetle, which I hope we never really have up here. A couple of them are suspected to help with nosema, but I don't know if anybody's putting it on the label. Mighty Way Quick Strips at one time did put, I think it was the tracheal mite on the label. And the essential oils, because of the essential oils, that's why Apiguard, and I think Apolite Bar too, help with the tracheal mite. With the Apiguard, the gel might help more because it's getting spread onto the outside of the bees. That could be why. Here it is again. This is the way that Honeybee Healthy did it and laid it out. They've got pretty good stuff on their website going through each type of hive. Chemical hive treatment from Varroa. And they're honest here about the synthetic chemicals, the essential oils, and then acids. And the acids are basically naturally derived. And then each one of those, somewhere along here, I've got they give you, if you go, sorry, I'm looking right there. On Honeybee Healthy, you can click on any one of those and go to a description of it that helps. So that should have been right next to there. If you were to click on oxalic acid, you would have gone to what I was just showing you. So you've got to read. You can't just assume, too, that all formic acids are created equal. It makes a difference on temperature. Here's Formic Pro versus Mighty Way Quick Strips. They're both formic acid, but their shelf life is different. Their treatment period is different. Even how they do a half dose. Some of them say absolutely this has to be out of direct sunlight. Cool and dark is always safe, pretty safe with chemicals. I can't think of a chemical that isn't safe in room temperature or less. Well, room temperature, a little less even, and dark. Pretty much that's a good storage technique. Coumaphos, this one might come back as Apivar fails. People may have to temporarily go back to Coumaphos. Covered formic. EPA labels, and they do have on them the directions for use. Sometimes they're confusing because they were made for one person to use that chemical in one situation at one concentration. So they don't necessarily apply to the general user. This one, people have argued about oxalic acid in the past, whether it was safe to use it at any other time, except when there's no brood at all, basically, or as low a brood as you can. And basically you are given permission to use it on this particular label anytime that you want to clean up during the application of a different acaricide where Varroa infestations continue to be problematic. For example, the Apivar that you really relied on fails. The Apiguard gel containers, you need that little bit of space because they're about a ½ inch deep. This is also what I use for pollen patties sometimes. So I can get them right on top of the brood frames going into the coldest part of winter. Oops. You can find these types of directions that make it visual. They got the temperature, they got the absolutely critical things you need to know. You can find those. And sometimes it's really important because you have, for example, a hive that has a very small entrance, and it will tell you, okay, in this case, you do need to offset the two boxes, for example. Closing the upper entrances, generally it says, here is the 7-day treatment option. Oh, this is the double. You do 2 strips right away for a week. This one says, okay, do half. Do 1 strip, okay, and then do the other strip. And yeah, this is very visual. This can really help. On Formic Pro, one of the most common mistakes, I know I'm getting close to 8, aren't I? Yes, I'm at 8. One of the most common mistakes on Formic Pro is not reading the instructions. And the instructions sometimes don't make sense. It says, do not remove the inner wrapper. And you're trying to figure out what they're talking about. They mean there's a cellophane type slow release wrapper that if you take it out, you can kill your hive because it will blast all at once. When you take out, you're supposed to take out the wrapper that holds 2 of them together for a dose. And then you're not supposed to take off the next wrapper for each of them individually wrapped. That is a slow release barrier. The instructions on Hop Guard. Maybe I should go check to see if there's anything that, one thing on Hop Guard is Hop Guard is a very soft treatment, very biotanical. It is, when it says you can use something up to 4 times per year, if you really want a soft treatment, very organic, very gentle on the bees to work, and it says up to so many times per year, what the manufacturers are telling you is do it that many times. It's a soft treatment. It's not supposed to knock the mites out the first time or the second time. They're talking about doing it year round. It is the one that you can use on packaged bees if you're going to ship them. You will actually make up, people who are making up the packages, they could staple to the inside, it says to the top. So when you're putting the top on the box, staple the half strips so they hang down, I think. And if you, this is a good one. This one, the bees would probably not object to, and they wouldn't abscond or anything, take off if you were to put this one in. This is a very gentle. Bees don't like the taste of it, but it's a very gentle treatment. This one, if you heard of this one, this is a commercial operating one. You're supposed to be able to put the apivar in stronger with a syringe. It can only be sold to commercial beekeepers, commercial pesticide applicators. I've talked a lot about oxalic acid already. And the guns, I always have a backup method. When your gun doesn't work, you may want something like Apiguard trays to go to. If you've never done oxalic acid the other ways, some people say with sugar syrup. I noticed that Randy Oliver said with glycerin, I think it was 5% glycerin solution the last time he was talking about it. That in a lot of ways makes more sense. And you are always supposed to make sure that your bees are as well fed as possible before you dump something on them on their outsides. And mixing it with sugar syrup just seems to me that possible they're going to ingest it too fast. Whereas if you put oxalic acid into glycerol, and mostly water, 95% pretty much water and 5% glycerol, and then the oxalic acid, if you were to do that, that would seem like a better way for the bees to spread it around the hive and work it in and expose the mites to it. Oxalic acid some more, and I don't think we have time to go through signs of dearth and robbing. I did put the slides here. I'm afraid you might experience this before we have an August meeting. So ask me if you'd like that. I think pretty much that's all we have time to cover. I'll stop sharing. I will stop the recording. Okay, where's the recording? Stop.